My name is Joshua Smith. I'm the Policy Director at the Senate Budget Committee, working for Chairman Bernie Sanders. I play many roles. I wear many hats for the committee. I help staff and plan our hearings. I'm the main communicator with the staffers for the other Democratic members on our committee and the staffers for the Democratic members throughout the Senate. I explain to them how various technical budget things work. I also help do a lot of the technical work of writing budget resolutions when we're in the majority, of enforcing the budget rules for the Senate. So when a bill that has spending or revenue impact comes to the floor, we assess it to make sure that it follows all the budget rules, and we alert the caucus if it trips any of those rules. Some of what I do is very technical in nature. Some is very policy specific, planning the hearings, figuring out our messages, relaying those messages. And some of it's sort of a combination of all of the above. The congressional budget process is incredibly confusing and involves many different steps. The Budget Committee is involved in the first and most sort of high level of those steps. So early in the year, we set what's called the budget resolution, which in a very 30,000 foot level establishes how much the government should spend and how much revenue it should take in a given year. After that part of the process, the appropriations committees actually figure out where that money should go. And generally they ignore our top level directives to begin with. And so they just sort of do what they want. The other major thing that the Budget Committee does is it kicks off what's called the reconciliation process. Without a budget resolution, you can't have a reconciliation bill. And in recent years, a reconciliation bill is a way to get around the filibuster in the Senate for spending and revenue legislation. So both in this Congress, the American Rescue Plan Act and the Inflation Reduction Act went through our committee. Those were in our jurisdiction. And all of the arguments that you heard about on the news before the parliamentarian about why certain provisions could be part of that reconciliation bill, that was argued by our lawyers, and we read every word, every line in those bills, and we're very instrumental in trying to get those to become law. I also do this combination between real technical work, technocratic work, and more communications messagey work. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is distilling some of that really technical, complicated stuff for a lay audience who might not have that very specific technical budget background. And perhaps that's my favorite part of what I do. I think first is the sort of signal that a Goldman School degree gave prospective employers. Here, as a committee staffer, most folks have either a graduate public policy degree or a law degree if they're one of those people. And so that was sort of needed to get in the door. But in terms of a skill set, I think that being familiar with all kinds of different academic literature, both studies, economic and econometric studies that I have to read and be familiar with, different ways of thinking about all the different issues that I confront on a daily basis, and just having a familiarity. I don't run regressions myself, but I have to be familiar with papers that include that kind of analysis. I need to understand, labor market dynamics and things like that. So I think that it was the sort of generalist bent of GSPP that really helps me. I'd say that to follow with the topic that you're really interested in. We constantly at GSPP talk about the trade-off between depth and breadth. And I find generally that in your career, you'll find yourself getting really deep about something. And by the time you get deep, just make sure that it's about something that you're really interested in. There aren't that many other people as deep as you. And at that point, I think that it's easy to sort of move around between think tanks and NGOs and Congress, different jobs in the federal government. Because when we hire, there aren't that many people out there who are experts in federal budget policy and procedure. And the same thing with my colleagues here at Congress on other committees. If you need to hire somebody who's an expert about this specific program within Medicaid or something like that, there aren't that many experts once you get to that level of depth. And once you know something, once you become a real expert on something, it's easy to move around and work at the place that most interests you, whether it's on the inside within Congress, or whether it's as an advocate, or different places in the policymaking process. When I first got hired by Senator Sanders in the Budget Committee, I didn't quite realize how much of the job was about procedure, about Senate procedure, about budget procedure. I thought it would be more policy heavy on economics, on budgeting, on debt and deficits. But in the Senate, the procedure is how things get done. But congressional procedure is incredibly important if you care about the policies that are ultimately enacted. These policies have to sort of navigate this absolute labyrinthine process. If you don't understand the process, you'll never get that kind of policy outcome that you want in the end. So the two really do go hand in hand. I didn't expect to work for Congress when I was in grad school. I didn't know how one got a job as a policy expert on the Hill. I sort of thought that people who worked here came here when they were 22 and worked their way up. And this is my very first job in Congress. Wasn't until after grad school. And in fact, I had a couple of different jobs before I made it to the Hill. There is really no direct path if you want to work for Congress. I think that if working on the Hill is something that really interests you, it makes sense to pursue the interest that you have, the policy area that you have, wherever you can. And if you become an expert at it, you'll ultimately start interfacing with Hill staffers. And that's how you ultimately can become one if that's something that you're interested in.